morning and welcome to the Financial Aid webinar. My name is Dr. Stephanie Sawyer, and I'm the Senior Associate Director of Financial Aid here at the University of San Francisco. I know you all have a lot of questions about the 24-25 FAFSA application, and believe it or not, so do we. This has been quite the year when it comes to FAFSAs, and hopefully I can answer some of your questions and alleviate some of your concerns. I do know that after the webinar, there will still be questions and concerns, and I will give you some information on who to contact with those questions and concerns. If you have a question, feel free to put it in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll do our best to get those answered. If for some reason we can't answer your question, I know some of you had submitted questions prior to the webinar, and we'll try to get you answers to those as well, but we'll go ahead and begin. So again, we're going to talk about completing your 2024-2025 FAFSA. And the reason we're holding this webinar is because there were a lot of changes with the 2024 FAFSA. And so we want to address some of those issues so that we can assist you as much as possible with getting your FAFSA completed and getting the most amount of aid that you're eligible for. So before we begin, there's a QR code on the screen. That QR code is where our slides from today's webinar will be held, as well as there will be a recording of this webinar. Now, the recording will not be available until next week, but if you wanted to scan that QR code now, you could go ahead and do that, and you'll be able to have the slides and follow along. So what are the things that we'll cover today? So first, we'll talk about what do you need to complete a FAFSA? How do you create a federal student aid ID? And we call that the FSA ID. Contributor information. There were a lot of changes this year, and now people who are required to put information on the FAFSA, they're called contributors. It used to be parent, student, and spouse. They're now all called contributors. We're going to review the 24-25 FAFSA, and then hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A. I do want to address the first question about whether or not you need to fill out a FAFSA every year, even if you don't qualify for aid. So you have to remember that anything other than a cash payment to a student's account is considered aid. Loans, grants, scholarships, that's all considered financial aid. And many of those have a requirement to complete the FAFSA every year. So I want to make sure that parents and students understand that once you complete the FAFSA the first year, you usually need to complete it every year. But if there are questions about whether or not your particular student or you need to complete the FAFSA every year, you can always email us in the financial aid office, and I'll give you that email at the end, and we can answer that question specific to you. But in general, most students are required to complete a FAFSA every single year. Okay, moving on. Preparing to complete the FAFSA. Now, I know some of you have completed the FAFSA, and you've struggled with some of those challenges, and we'll talk a little bit about those challenges as well. So this is kind of going to give you some information so that when the FAFSA is processed, you'll be able to go back in and make the necessary corrections if you did make some of the errors that we're talking about, or if you may have missed some information or you forgot to put something on your FAFSA, you will have an opportunity to edit once the FAFSAs are processed. So the DOE is monitoring the site. Sometimes they make the FAFSA unavailable to conduct maintenance and improve the user experience. It's very challenging for the institution to be able to help you with when that will happen because they don't notify us either at times. So some days we log in and we see that the FAFSA is unavailable. Now, I know they did have a soft launch, and that soft launch, if you completed your FAFSA during the soft launch, you don't need to resubmit the application after the soft launch, now that the soft launch has ended. Once you get your FAFSA, if you completed your FAFSA during the soft launch and you feel like you made an error, that's when you would go back and make a correction. But if you completed your FAFSA and you just haven't gotten confirmation yet, or it's not been processed yet, there isn't anything you need to do. And the next part is what makes it difficult for us to assist right now is that we will not receive your FAFSAs until March, in mid to late March. And so we don't have the information that you submitted, so we can't answer specific questions about your FAFSA until it's been sent to the institution. So I know many of you may have called in the schools saying that you have to, contact the Department of Education and things of that nature. And that's why, because we can't see your data just yet. But if you ask general questions like, what if this, we may be able to answer. And sometimes you'll think you made a mistake that you really didn't make because of all the changes they've made this year. If you've completed a FAFSA in the past, you may see that something you entered last year, they didn't ask you that question this year, so you think you missed something, when in reality, they've made some changes and there's some skip logic built in, and you may not need to answer that. So again, it's kind of all up in the air until we actually get those processed FAFSAs. And then once we do, we're going to send an email that says, well, the Department of Ed will send you an email initially that says your FAFSA submission summary is available to review. And that's the data that will let you see the data that you put on the FAFSA. But you're also going to get an email from the USF when we receive it that says, hey, we've received your email. And then we'll give you a processing timeline as to when we think we'll be able to get those awards out to you. All right, so here are some known issues. So the FSA, they've listed a resource. It's called Known Issues. So if you're experiencing some technical difficulties, we recommend you checking out that page. There's a QR code to that page. So we are fully aware that there is an issue with the parents with no social security number unable to start the FAFSA form or be a contributor to an existing form. There's currently no workaround for this issue, but the student can still start the application. The parent will not be able to contribute the information at this time. But once the issue is resolved, the parent will be able to go in and complete the FAFSA as a contributor, even though they don't have a social security number. And we are aware how difficult this is for parents and students, but rest assured, as an institution, we're going to work with you. We will make sure that our deadlines, do not pose additional stress to you and your family, because we are aware that this is not your fault and it's not our fault either. So we will work with you to get these FAFSAs processed as soon as all of these issues are resolved. All right. So let's talk about what you'll need to complete a FAFSA. So first, you'll need an FSA ID. If you have a parent or a spouse contributor, you're going to need their name, date of birth, social security number, email address, income and asset information if you have income and assets, the tax returns from 2022, records of child support received, current balances of cash, savings, and checking accounts, and the net worth of investments, businesses, and farms. Now, I want to talk to you all about, parent or spouse, social security numbers, and contributors. Some students have been entering that their parents don't have a social security number because they don't have their parent's social security number at the time. We want to make sure that we're not avoiding answering any questions because we don't have the information, because the FAFSA will be processed without that information. And then once the school receives it, you'll have to go back in and process the information again if we later determine that your parent did have a social security number. And it also prevents your FAFSA, because there is an issue with the contributors who don't have social security number right now. It delays the processing of your FAFSA. So you want to make sure you answer all of the questions. There are some helpful hints and tips, like little question marks on the side of each question on the FAFSA. And so if you ever have questions, you want to look at those hints and tips to kind of help guide you through the process. Okay, so what is the FSA ID? So the FSA ID is your account username and password that you use to log into all federal student aid products and tools on studentaid.gov. And anyone who contributes to a FAFSA, or anyone who contributes to the FAFSA, or if they need to check any data, the student, the parent, the spouse, any contributors will need a FSA ID. You create that FSA ID on studentaid.gov. Every contributor creates their own FSA ID because it is attached to that person's social security number. And so the parent has the FSA ID, the spouse has an FSA ID, and the student would have an FSA ID. So you create your FSA ID at studentaid.gov. You provide your name, date of birth, social security number. You can create a unique username, your email address, a strong password, mailing address, phone number, communication preference, and complete the challenge questions and answers. And those are just in case you forget your login information, then they can ask you some follow-up questions to confirm that it's you. You confirm and you verify your information, agree to the terms and conditions, and you allow the FSA ID to be verified. If you remember a little while ago, I said that the FSA ID is attached to your individual social security number or your contributor's social security number. They verify the information that you enter here with the Social Security Administration to verify that it is you. The FSA ID without an SSN. So you also create your account on studentaid.gov. You answer 1 to 4 knowledge-based questions based on a TransUnion credit report. Upon completion of the account creation process, you're going to see a confirmation page and the results of your identity verification. If for some reason they cannot verify that you are who you say you are, and remember, this is an FSA ID without an SSN. And I want to stop here and make sure that you understand this is if you do not have a social security number, not if you do not remember it. So this is just for people who do not have a social security number. If for some reason you fail the TransUnion process, you'll be informed that FSA was unable to verify your information and that you have to contact the FSA Center. FSA is going to create a case number and send a verification email, which will include guidance on how to submit copies of unexpired acceptable documentation to verify your identity. That's going to be like your driver's license, state ID card, or even your foreign passport. And so again, this is for contributors who do not have an SSN. Once you get that email that FSA was unable to verify your identity, you'll be required to submit one or combination of the acceptable documentation. You'll also have to sign an attestation form, and FSA will review the documents and your form. And if there's a match and they feel like all of the information matches and it's successful, then they'll finalize the information, create the account. And at that point, and only at that point, will you be able to, once you get an email that your account is ready to use, you'll be able to use your FSA ID to be a contributor. And that's new, and it is a lot of information. And that's why I tell parents and students that you really have to check your email when you're completing a FAFSA, because that's the way they communicate with you. And it's usually through the email that you've put on your FAFSA. So you want to check it and you want to read it thoroughly to see if the Department of Education is asking you for any additional information so that there's no delay in processing your FAFSA. And just a reminder, if you have questions, to put your questions in the Q&A. It should be some on the bottom of your screen within the Zoom. Okay, so what happens if you forget your FSA ID? We all know that we have a lot of passwords and things, so it's easy to forget. So if for some reason you don't write it down and you forget, that's why you had those challenge questions. So to reset your password, you'll need to have access to the verified email or verified phone number you used when creating your FSA ID. And you can, but to ensure that you have access to that information, you can use a password manager. Make sure you put your FSA ID in there and your verified email. We have parents and students with multiple emails and they can't remember which one they used on their FSA ID. And the school doesn't have access to that information because, as you remember, I said it's attached to your social security number. So unfortunately, we wouldn't be able to tell you what email you use to set up your FSA ID or where that information is going. So make sure that you keep this information in a safe and secure location just in case you forget. Let's talk a little bit about who is a contributor. So a contributor is any individual that's required to provide consent and or approval for federal tax information and or their signature on the FAFSA, including the student, and it's based on the student's dependency status. So for a dependent student, it would be the student, the biological, adoptive, or step parent, and that's if the parent are still married to the step parent. For an independent student, it could be the student's spouse as well. And so if their tax information is required or signature on the FAFSA, they are a contributor. They will need an FSA ID. They will also need to sign the FAFSA form. Okay, so to invite a contributor, because once you complete the FAFSA as a student or as a parent, it says, okay, now we need to get information from the other people that need to be on your FAFSA as well, that need to consent to FTI information or that needs to add their information. So those are your contributors. They're going to ask you to tell them who those contributors should be. That information is not in the FAFSA, so you will need the legal name from their Social Security card. We have quite a few parents and students who use nicknames, and we know that it's reasonable and customary. You get so used to using your nickname that you forget when you're filling out a legal document to use their legal name, and it needs to match what's on the Social Security card. So you would need their legal name, the date of birth, the Social Security number, if they have one, not if you have it, and then their email address. We're going to watch a short video about understanding FAFSA contributors.
Second stop in your financial aid journey is to familiarize yourself with contributors. Contributor is a new term being introduced on the 2024-25 free application for federal student aid, or FAFSA form. Learn what is expected of a contributor and how you can prepare your contributors to participate in filling out your FAFSA form. A contributor is anyone who is required to provide consent and approval to have their federal tax information transferred directly from the IRS into the FAFSA form and a signature on the form. You, the student, are considered a contributor. Other contributors may include your spouse, your biological or adoptive parent, or your parent's spouse, a step-parent. If your family member is identified as a contributor, it does not mean that they have an obligation to pay for your education. Whether someone other than you is determined to be a contributor is based on your dependency status, your marital status, and the way you file your taxes. When you fill out your FAFSA form, you'll be asked to provide your contributors' information so that they can complete their required sections in your form. You'll need to ask for your contributors' full name, their Social Security number, if they have one, their date of birth, and their email address. You will then be able to invite them to your FAFSA form so that they can complete their required sections. Once invited, contributors will receive an email with a link that they can use to access your FAFSA form and provide the required information. Important tip: each contributor is required to have their own studentaid.gov account, so make sure you and your contributors have each created your own account before starting the FAFSA form. Consent and approval to have federal tax information transferred directly from the IRS into the FAFSA form are also required for all contributors. If consent and approval are not provided, you will not be eligible for federal student aid. Have conversations with family members who may be identified as a contributor to make sure they understand their role and to avoid any issues when completing your FAFSA form. To continue preparing for the FAFSA form, check out our next video in this playlist to learn how to set up your studentaid.gov account.
Thank you for watching that. And so that was just a little bit of information about being a contributor on the form, because we know that sometimes it can be confusing as to who needs to be on the FAFSA. So let's talk a little bit about completing the FAFSA. So this is the FAFSA landing page. When you log in, if you've not started the FAFSA, you want to start a new form. For those of you that are started, you can access the existing form. The challenge is that if you have an existing form that you need to edit, if it's already been submitted, you cannot edit just yet. Once they start processing those and you receive that FAFSA submission summary that I talked about a little earlier, then you'll be able to go back in, but you can log in and still see that it is processing or it's pending, those types of things. But you would definitely want to start the new form. Now, if you'll notice, for fall of next year, we are in the 24-25 FAFSA. The 23-24 FAFSA is still out there and it is available. As you can see right here, it says start the 23-24 FAFSA form. That is because students who are attending in the current semester spring and the upcoming summer semester, they will need the 23-24 FAFSA, but if they haven't already filed one. However, if this is for next fall, you will need the 24-25 FAFSA, and that is the FAFSA that most of the changes we've talked about today is related to. And then you have the student login. To access the FAFSA form and all other things on studentaid.gov, you will need to have an FSA ID. So you would either enter the email, the phone number, or the FSA ID username, and then the secure password that you created when you created your FSA ID. And as you can see, they have forgot my password and forgot my username. If you haven't created an account, it has created an account. So all of the information you need would be on this particular form. Okay, and then the great question is, are you the student or the parent? And this is really important because we often have parents completing the FAFSA as a student. And when the parent completes the FAFSA as a student, the challenge we see is that when it starts to say, tell us about your this and tell us about your that, the parents sometimes forget that it's asking for the student. So we really recommend that even if you're logging in together, student and parent, that you understand which part of the FAFSA you're completing. Are you on the student portion or the parent portion? Because we also see students who have parents' tax information, and that shouldn't happen now if you consent to the FTI and you're allowed to use that information. However, if for some reason you enter the student's tax information or the parent's tax information, if you're required to put that information in, then it could cause some problems and delays with processing because we would have to update that. But yes, so you decide, are you starting the FAFSA form as a student or a parent? There are some videos out there that you can watch, and it asks questions like, what is the FAFSA form? It then answers, who are contributors? We just watched one video on contributors. What to expect after submitting the form? What happens next? So you may want to take a look at those videos because they may assist you in moving forward. It will also ask you your state of legal residence. Now, this is the state you currently live in. If you have never lived in another state, students, parents, excuse me, the month and the year would be the date that you were born. So we've had some people who have difficulty filling out this part. So we want to make sure that you understand that. You have to provide consent. And this consent is to transfer the tax information from the IRS to the FAFSA. Please remember that if you do not consent, you or the student will not be eligible for federal student aid. So consent is required. Okay, so what about student and contributor who don't provide consent and approval? So you have two opportunities to provide consent and approval prior to submitting the FAFSA. When the consent and approval is not provided, manual entry of the financial aid information is required, but the student will not be eligible for federal student aid. You will get warning messages, and they will ask you, and they will tell you, as you can see here, this student will not be eligible for federal student aid. Do you still wish to decline, or do you wish to provide approval? And so you want to make sure that you provide approval. And that's new for 24-25 as well. Parents used to be able to opt out of the transfer from the IRS, and the student would still be eligible for financial aid, but that does not happen anymore. Okay, next up, it asks you to select the student's marital status. And as you can see, it says you're in the student and the student's marital status. And so make sure you put single if the student is single. And if the parent is helping the student, make sure you don't put married unless the student is married. Then it asks the college or career plans for the student. Will the student be a freshman, a sophomore, a junior, senior? Are they working on a graduate degree? Now, I want a preference here that if you put that the student is working on a master's or a doctoral degree, even if they decide they want to go to that level, you would only check this if the student has already completed a bachelor's degree. So even if you know your student who's a first-year freshman will go into a graduate program, they can only check this box once they have successfully completed the bachelor's degree and are getting into the master's or doctoral graduate program that next year. And again, this question asks, will they already have their first bachelor's degree during the 24-25 years? So you would answer that no if your student is a new freshman, or unless they, completed a bachelor's degree and they're working on a graduate program. It asks about personal circumstances, and this is very, very, very important. They want you to select all that apply or say none of these apply. This helps determine whether or not the student is an independent student or a dependent student. So are you active duty in the military? The student. Is the student a veteran of the armed forces? And you see this little I next to it. If there's any question about the answer that the question they're asking, you have the I's and the question marks here that will help you. At any time since the student turned 13, were they an orphan? Were they a ward of the court? Were they in foster care? And it says any time since the student turned 13. Was the student legally emancipated as a minor? And that means before they reach the age of majority. Was the student in legal guardianship, not custody, legal guardianship with someone other than their parent or step-parent as determined by a court in their state of residence? Or none of these apply. So be very careful with answering those questions. Other circumstances. Was the student an unaccompanied? And I want to make sure we understand that unaccompanied means without their parent. So we've had some instances, unfortunately, where the entire family was at risk of homelessness or homelessness. This is the answer to this question wants you to tell us if the student doesn't have a parent or have access to a parent anymore, and they are at risk of being homeless and self-supporting. So be careful. Another question that helps us determine the student's dependency status, but be careful in answering these questions because the institution could ask for additional information. And if it is incorrect, then we have to go back and change that information. And those are the things that cause delays in processing. Okay, and then there are some unusual circumstances, and it gives you a list of unusual circumstances. This is not all inclusive, but it gives you some of those. And it asks if there are unusual circumstances that would prevent the student from contacting their parents, or if contacting their parents would pose a risk. This is not asking if your parents have decided not to help you pay for college. And I want to reiterate that because it's only asking if there are some unusual circumstances where the student is at risk if they contact a parent or if they just can't contact a parent. So these are unusual circumstances. If yes, you answer yes, the institution will follow up with you. If no, answer no, and you continue. Okay, so then based on those answers to the previous question, so what it doesn't ask is your date is whether or not you will be 24 in the year of the FAFSA. That's another question that makes you independent, sorry. It doesn't ask that because you entered your date of birth initially, and when you entered your date of birth, it determined whether or not you were independent based on that date of birth. It will still ask you those other dependency questions, but it will not ask you whether or not you'll be 24. So now you've been deemed either an independent student, which means you don't have to answer questions about your parent, or a dependent student, which means that you do have to answer questions about your parent. I want you to pay close attention to the dependent status student. There's a question here that we've received some feedback from the Department of Education that students are answering incorrectly. It says, apply for a direct unsubsidized loan only. This is for students who have parents that they can contact, but the parents are unwilling to provide their information. The student doesn't have a special circumstance. You would only answer yes to this if parents are unwilling to provide their information. Apparently, students are reading this thinking it says, would you like to apply for a direct loan? And they're saying yes, even though they do have parents who would be able to put their information on the FAFSA. So just like everything else, it's going to cause a delay in processing because we will need to go back and get this updated and then get the parent information added. If you remember when I originally started, I said there's skip logic built in. When you answer that yes, then they don't ask you dependency questions. They don't ask you the rest of the parent information that we need to process the FAFSA. So that's another delay because we would have to go back and answer those questions. So just be very careful and read the questions thoroughly so that you make the right answers. But when you put that you have parent information and you don't put that your parents are unwilling, then they start to ask you if your parents are married to each other. It's going to ask you to tell us about your parents. And then it asks you to invite your parents as contributors. And you can see it says parent, parent, spouse, if you put that your parents are married. And then it asks you for the information I told you would ask earlier, parent social security number, email address, so forth and so on, last name, date of birth. And you would have to answer your information on the parent contributors. Once you put that information in, the parents will get an email saying, hey, your student has invited you to complete a FAFSA. They've invited you to be a contributor on the FAFSA. Would you like to log in now and complete the information? The parent would click on the link and then they would be able to log in and complete the FAFSA. Now, just a caveat here. I have heard some parents say that they have difficulty just going to studentaid.gov, logging in, and seeing that they are required to be a contributor and that the best way to get there would be to click on the link that is sent in the contributor email. So that is what you want to do. That's the best way to go. I am hopeful that by the time we get these FAFSAs in March, all of these little nuances will be fixed, but I'm hopeful. I can't guarantee. So I'm just giving you little nuggets that may help you along the way as you're trying to complete the FAFSA so that you don't run into some of the same issues that some of the other students and parents have run into. All right, so the student will be asked about their gender or identity, and it gives you an option to put non-binary, prefer not to answer. This information does not impact a student's aid eligibility. So if you prefer not to answer, that is okay. Race and ethnicity, again, this information does not affect the student's aid eligibility determination. Citizenship status. Are you a U.S. citizen, eligible non-citizen, or neither? Also, again, there's a little I here. You click on that I if you need additional information. If you select that you're an eligible non-citizen, then you will be asked to provide your alien registration number. If you select that you're neither a U.S. citizen nor eligible non-citizen, you're not eligible for federal student aid. This even includes students who may have a social security number. But if you're not an eligible non-citizen or a U.S. citizen, you're not eligible at this time for federal student aid. You'll be asked to provide your parents' education level on the FAFSA as well. Again, this doesn't determine your federal aid eligibility at all. High school completion status. Did you complete high school? If you completed high school, it's going to ask you the state, the city, state, and the high school name. You can notice that the high school name is optional, but you can search for it and you'll be able to pull up your high school as long as you have the city and the state accurately. For the independent students, it's going to ask if you filed a 2022 tax return. Well, actually, it's going to ask if you filed it with your current spouse, if you are married, if the independent student is married, and then it's going to continue to ask some extra questions, things that the IRS would not have on your FAFSA, on the tax return information. So things like college grants, scholarships, or AmeriCorps benefits, foreign income exclusion, questions like that. Child support received, the balance of cash savings and checking accounts do not include student financial aid here. Current network of investment. And I know this was a question initially. It says, do we have to include our home? So if this is your primary residence that you live in, it is not required to be included as an asset. If you have other real estate that is an investment income, then you would have to complete the you would have to put in the estimated value of that. Businesses, it tells you here that you can minus any debts owed against them. So it does for the parent and or the student. It could take you a while to kind of gather this information. So that's why earlier we said one of the things you will need is the information about your assets. Okay, it does ask your family size and the number in college. And it asks if your family size has changed since 2022 when you filed your tax return. And if you answer yes, then it's also going to ask you to update your family size. You have the ability to list up to 20 schools to send your FAFSA to. You can use our school code, which is 001325. If you don't remember that when you're completing your FAFSA, you can put in the state, the city, and the school's name. It will populate on the bottom, and then you hit select, and that school will be added. You have 20. I know there was a question asked to us earlier. I'm not sure if that person is on, but the question was, if the student is applying to more than 20 schools, will they have the ability to make updates? And what I say to that is the 20 schools that you put on the FAFSA will get your initial application. You always have the ability to update your FAFSA. That change, though, won't happen until March. So it kind of depends on when the other institution sends out their award information. If they have awarding practices that say, you have to have, all of your financial aid, your FAFSA into us by mid-March, then the answer to that question is no, you may not have your FAFSA in time to update. But if for some reason the student decides to go to a school that's not USF, that is not on the FAFSA, then at that point you would then communicate with the school, of course, but you would let them know, you would go ahead and make the changes to the FAFSA and let them know why the FAFSA is arriving late. But I always tell parents, put your top 20 schools, the ones that are just automatically, it's going to be a top 20. And if that doesn't work, then you'll have to, use plan B. All right, then you get a student review page. So this page displays the responses, and it shows that everything is done except the signatures. You're welcome to expand. You can always go back. But if you feel like you've done everything, then you would hit continue. And then you would be on the signature page. You have to agree and then submit, sign and submit the FAFSA. So make sure you read and acknowledge the terms and conditions. If the contributors are invited to complete the FAFSA is not considered complete and submitted until they complete their portion. So that's important to know. And now, because of the way things are processing, if for some reason your FAFSA is in limbo and you need to make some changes, right now, we all just have to wait until the Department of Ed starts processing the FAFSA, and then we'll be able to go back and make those changes. And then once you get everything done on the student side, side, the dependent students will then see that you're looking for parent contributors, and you will see that the invite has been sent and that you're waiting. And so, like I said a few seconds ago, your FAFSA is not considered complete until all contributors have entered their information and signed the FAFSA. You also have the ability to edit the contributor invite. Now, I have heard some students and parents say they've had some issues with that. But you should be able to edit the invite sent. If you're not, we have students who may put the wrong email address in for the parent. It's very important that you check every entry of the FAFSA. One letter off, one number off, they're not going to receive the email. So you definitely want to check and make sure that you entered everything appropriately. This is what the contributors see. And so once the contributor logs in, they'll be able to, it'll take them to FSA, to studentaid.gov, and they'll need to use their FSA ID to log in. And they're basically saying, hello, we need you to complete this form. And then the My Activity page on studentaid.gov shows the invitation for the student to be a contributor. And you can select Get Started. However, I mentioned earlier that there have been some parents that have not been able to access from here. So I definitely want everyone to try to use the link from the email initially, but if not, you should be able to see it under My Activity. Contributors, and I mentioned this earlier as well, they must provide their consent and approval so that the tax information can be transferred directly to the FAFSA from the IRS. I'll reiterate, the student will be ineligible for federal student aid if all contributors do not provide consent. And that is new, which is why I keep saying it over and over again. We want the student to be eligible for federal student aid. And so we need the contributors to provide consent. Once the contributor enters their information, they'll get a confirmation page, and it just says that the student will receive notification. I know parents, sometimes you want to log in and you want to be able to see everything, but they actually do most of the communication with the student other than sending you the contributor email. But it will tell you that the student will get an email, the student will receive communications. And once the student and all contributors have signed their portion, the FAFSA is now complete and you're just waiting. The school will receive the information. Once they start processing, you will receive the FAFSA submission summary, and then all of the information can at that point either be edited or you're ready to be awarded. Okay, so let's talk about that FAFSA submission summary that I just mentioned. And so the FAFSA submission summary page shows an overview of eligibility. It'll say the student is eligible for potentially eligible for federal Pell Grant and federal direct loans. This information is based on the answers from the FAFSA. I do want to provide a caveat here. It's based on the answers that you provide. If at any time the school determines that the answers to the questions that you provided are inaccurate, it could change your eligibility. So that's why this is just an estimate of what you could potentially be eligible for. And as students navigate throughout their degree, their eligibility changes as well. So we just want to make sure that you understand that this is a summary of an estimate and not a guarantee. Most often, students put the right information on here, and now with the federal tax transfer, everything is accurate. So there shouldn't be any issues, but there's always a case where something may have been entered correctly and what you originally saw on your initial FAFSA submission summary is not accurate anymore. It also displays your student aid index. That's the index that's calculated to determine your family's ability to pay for school. I know some students say, well, my student aid index, or, it says that I don't have any money to pay for school. I just want to make sure that you all understand. It doesn't determine how much school costs. or the college for the college that you choose to go to. So that zero doesn't mean that when you attend USF that you will pay $0. What it does mean is that you're going to get the highest need-based aid that we have because you are one of our neediest students. So that's important to keep in your back pocket, to understand that just because that says zero, it doesn't mean that you won't have any out-of-pocket expense for the institution. You can see when the FAFSA was reviewed and processed. You can print and save the FAFSA submission summary to keep for your records. If you need technical support, and I know a lot of you have had questions about what can I do now? I'm waiting, I'm waiting, I'm waiting. For what, as of today, what we know is it will be March before we have any processed FAFSAs. Once that information is sent to the institution, we can help you a little bit more on how to make your changes, letting you know what changes need to be made. You'll be able to log back in and see what was processed and see where the errors were made. Until then, you will need to call the Federal Student Aid Information System. They have a live chat, they have a phone number. You can go online and do the contact us. They do have like tickets that you can enter now. I know that students have had and parents have been on hold for very long times. And you can imagine that because there are so many challenges with the FAFSA, they're inundated with calls. And I know that doesn't help you, but trust me when I tell you, once your FAFSA is processed, we will be able to make whatever changes are necessary to get your FAFSA processed again. And once they start processing, the assumption is what we've seen in the past. I can't tell you this year has been unprecedented, but once they start processing, they will continue processing. And usually a change takes anywhere from 1 to 3 to 5 business days. So 1 to 5 business days, we usually have that change. So it shouldn't be a wait of 6 or 7 months anymore. Once they start processing, we just have to wait for that processing to start to be able to move past where we are now, where everybody is just in a waiting period. You can also contact the Office of Financial Aid. We have Zoom virtual drop-in advising. You can email us at financialaid@usfca.edu. You can contact us at the phone number here. Also, if you scan the code here, you'll see more information on our contact dates, times, hours, and the link to the Zoom. Okay, it looks like most of our questions have been answered. I want to thank my co-host Jenny for answering a lot of your questions. There is one, and I think I answered this. It says, if you own a residence, is it true that we do not need to list it as an asset on our application? And the answer is correct. If that is your primary, residence and you're not using it for income, then you do not need to list that as an asset on your FAFSA. I want to thank you all for joining us today. We do have about 10 minutes. That is the end of the actual presentation. If you have additional questions, please type those in the Q&A now so that we can answer those questions for you. If you do not have any additional questions, please feel free to go ahead and log off. Have a great rest of your day. We look forward to seeing you all in the fall, and thank you for joining us. You're welcome. Thank you. So there's a question that says, what if the FAFSA prevents me from submitting? I would need a little bit more information about the whys, but as I mentioned earlier, you can definitely give them a call because there may be an issue that we're not aware of, or it could just be the system. Sometimes the system is down, but if you've entered everything correctly and it's not giving you any errors, you should be able to submit. So there's a question for a returning student. What is our deadline? So what I say about deadlines for returning students is this. You'll be awarded, but as you know, we have payment deadlines. And you want to get your FAFSA submitted as soon as possible so that once we start awarding, we can award you as quickly as possible, because that then gives you the opportunity to look at whether or not you're going to have an out-of-pocket expense, or whether or not, everything is completely covered. And at that point, if you complete your FAFSA early enough, then you have the information you need to make an informed decision well before fall, when school starts and you have payment deadlines. So the earlier you get your FAFSA done, the earlier we can get you awarded once we start receiving those, and then you'll have your financial aid on your account. So the difference between the SAI and former EFC technically is just how it's calculated, but the EFC, estimated family contribution, was the new SAI was the former EFC. And so they are calculated differently, but it's the same in that it indicates a student and family's ability to pay. But remember, even if it says that you should not be required to pay anything, it does not mean that you won't have anything to pay. It just means that you are our highest need student. So we should do our best to give you as much need-based aid as possible. Any additional questions? Yes, absolutely. Check the page frequently. There was a QR code to the financial aid page. We are always updating our page on the 24-25 FAFSA. And just understand that we also understand your frustration with this FAFSA this year. There have been a lot of, challenges, and we're aware of that. And as I said earlier, we will make sure as an institution that we don't hold the students responsible for things that were outside of their control. We're doing everything we can to extend deadlines, to communicate with students. So we'll be here with you every step of the way. Okay. So the last question we have is, my issue is that my information cannot be verified. I'm told that the Social Security number I entered is already associated with an account, even if I've never created another account. And to that, I would also say call. Now, sometimes, and I hope this is not the case, sometimes a parent or someone else may have created an account using your Social Security number, and maybe they transposed a number or two on their Social Security number. And for that, you would definitely have to call the Federal Student Aid Information Center, because they would be able to help you determine if you truly have an account, or if there is an issue with the Social Security number. And as long as you're looking at your Social Security card, or your Social Security number, then that is one of the issues that they can help you with. And they should be able to help you with that now. It's just going to be, like we discussed a little earlier, a little difficult to get in touch with them. I do know that you can submit a ticket. I'm advising students to do so, because if you submit a ticket, then at least you can track that it has been submitted, and then you can see when it's been answered, or at least see how long it takes them to get that answered for you. So we don't have any more open questions. So we'll go ahead and give you 5 minutes back in your day. Thank you all again for joining us. Oh, wait, one more question popped up. If I'm unable to get past the enter spouse info to sign, I enter all info, entering information to get to sign. I'm going to need a little bit more information. On the first question, if you can't get past the spouse information to sign and you're entering all the information, again, that may be an issue where you want to communicate with them. Once the FAFSA starts to process in March, the institution will be able to do a little bit more to assist you, because at that point, we'll be able to see the information. Right now, All of the communication would need to go through Department of Education because we are unable to see any of the information and we are not sure where the error is coming from. I've told students, and I'll say it again, is sometimes it's a system problem. Sometimes when you log in, the system is down, and if you log in again, then we'll be able to you'll be able to process the information. Other times there's something that was entered incorrectly and you may have to go back and update that. But they have access to your FAFSA form right now, and so they will be able to provide you with some additional information and hopefully walk you through how to get past those errors. Any additional questions? Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and end it. Thank you so much for coming, and we appreciate you. Have a good day, and we look forward to seeing you in the fall.